Welcome back to OpenLine. So glad you're with us tonight. I have Howard Cattell from the Hermitage, of course, home to Andrew Jackson, talking with me today about the big changes coming to our currency, and most notably for us Tennesseans, the $20 bill is getting a pretty significant makeover, with Andrew Jackson being moved to the back. Harriet Tubman will be added to the front. We've been asking you for your opinion, and Lucy's going to chime in tonight. Lucy, thanks for being part of the show.
Yeah, sure. I'm glad that y'all are having this show, because I remember when this came out, they brought up the 10 and the 20, and being a native Tennessean, the first thing I thought was, oh yeah, get rid of Hamilton, because there was this little argument that with the Federal Reserve in Hamilton and Jackson, what I remember, Jackson didn't want the Federal Reserve Bank. He wanted us to print our own money. But a lot of people that I talk to who are so anti-Federal Reserve and say, oh, our government's printing all this money, the Federal Reserve, they were in favor of keeping Hamilton. So I'm like, well, whatever. But, you know, Andrew Jackson, he was a slave holder. I heard the thing from Ben Carson saying that why not put Harriet Tubman on the $2 bill? Well, I'm kind of a common person, as in I'm just a common man, and I've heard this this old saying, as cheap as a $2 or.
Lucy,
I know, but when I heard him say that, I'm like, are you kidding? Do you know what you're saying? Do you know what that infers?
Yeah.
So I think Andrew Jackson, I've heard stories where, he had to remove the Indians. And so my family were Scottish, and we had married into the Indians, and a lot of free blacks and Scots that had married into the Cherokee tribe had tried to save as many other Indian families as they could before they were removed. But he also had said, and there was a book written here recently, John Siegenthaler had interviewed this guy, where there's evidence where Jackson had gone to one of the chiefs that said that if we don't remove you, they're going to slaughter you. So I think Andrew Jackson, with all his faults, would probably be happy to sit on the back of the bill with the White House, because he was the president, and let Miss Harriet Tubman move to the front of the bill. Because I think it's high time that we honor a black woman in our history, and I could think of no better woman to honor than Harriet Tubman, who went through so much and was so courageous. I can't even say the word courageous, and she did so much for the lesser of all of us. So that's my opinion. And correct me if I'm wrong on that Federal Reserve stuff. I want to hear what you have to say about Hamilton and Jackson, if you don't mind.
All right, Lucy, let's talk to Howard about that. What about that?
Well, Alexander Hamilton was not necessarily a man without controversy as well.
Sure.
He right after the Revolutionary War, he agitated almost a level of insurrection, because the American troops were not being paid, and George Washington had to take him aside and essentially say, sit down and we'll work on getting you paid.
Wow.
And during the Washington's two administrations, Hamilton was pushing on a strong central government and a central bank, and he and Thomas Jefferson locked horns as well. So he had a history of controversy as well. But he shaped our banking system to a very great degree. Jackson changed the banking system while he was president. There had been the second bank of the United States that held American federal tax money or tariff money, and then dispensed it at the direction of Congress. But the second bank was actually a privately owned corporation that had been chartered by Congress. And Jackson felt that the bank was inappropriately using its influence and its money to make sure that Congress did what would be in the best interests of the bank. And the bank was a central bank, too, that dispensed credit. So the country existed on credit just as it does today.
Isn't that funny? So many years ago, we're still having the same debates and the same conversations and controversies.
We are, and that second bank of the United States in some ways was not unlike the Federal Reserve today, except it could print money. And I think the other important point to raise here, there's been a lot of discussion about, well, Jackson didn't like paper currency. Why is he on
The paper currency.
paper currency? But the fact is that the paper currency of Jackson's time wasn't issued by the federal government.
Who was it issued by?
It was issued by individual banks, sometimes states. So it was more like a promissory note that you would have whatever the denomination is, you take it to the bank, and you could trade it in for gold or silver. And just recently I read a new book on the creation of the Federal Reserve. My wife looked at me like,
This is real exciting, Howard.
Oh, yeah, you have gone beyond the nerd level here, sir. But it was talking about that early on, the farther you got away from the issuing bank, the less likely you were to be able to redeem the
Well, that makes
value
sense,
of that
yeah.
note. And Jackson had lost considerable sums of money with paper currency. That's why he insisted on what was called specie or coins, gold, silver coins.
I'm learning so much today. I love this. Okay, let's talk to Polly. He's been waiting on the line. Polly, good evening to you.
Hello.
Hi there. Go ahead with your comment or question.
Well, first of all, the Hermitage is my favorite place in the world to go, so
That's
I'm really
nice.
upset. But with that being said, I also heard that this is, in the end, when it, they get them all on there, it's going to be called a celebration for the women's right to vote. Am I correct?
That is on the 5 or the 10. I'll have to dig through some of my papers, but that will be either on the 5 or the 10.
Okay, but talking about, it was in the past that he owned slaves. I personally never owned a slave, so I think people should just let it go and leave the money alone.
Well, there you go. All right, good enough. I'm looking through my notes. I'll get back to you on that, Polly. But thank you very much for being with us tonight. All right, let's jump on to, I think we have Roosevelt on the line too. Roosevelt, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
Hi there.
Hi. I like to try to be thorough in my understanding of things. And was there a committee that came together to make the decision about Ms. Tubman being on the $20 bill? And also, I'm a women's rights advocate, and I like to share this opportunity to give this website, NAWBO.org. That's the website where you have the 13 banks in America that are owned by women. And I have not met a woman yet who have even thought that there are banks in America who women own. But I would like to know if there's any kind of, was there a committee that went into this decision, or just one person made the decision?
Howard, you probably know better than me, and everything that I've read just talks about Mr. Liu. So.
Correct. I suspect that there were a group of people within Treasury, the Secretary of the Treasury, probably the Treasurer herself, Rosie Rios, and several others. There were, I think, in the neighborhood of 500,000 or 1 million comments sent
wow.
to Treasury about changing the $10 bill and advocating that the 20 be changed. And a lot of this, and Treasury was very upfront about this, that the Broadway play, the smash Broadway play, Hamilton.
Isn't that crazy? Weighed in so heavily on this.
Yes, and it's the musical is becoming a phenomenon.
Yes.
And here it's going to Europe. And I frankly was stunned that the passions about Hamilton were that strong.
And that maybe even changed or, I don't know, ignited just by a musical. I mean, I know it's phenomenal, but
Absolutely.
wow.
But the other thing that's interesting about this is that the support for Hamilton came from the Northeast, and especially from the banking community of the Northeast. The support for Jackson has come from the Southeast, which is exactly how his support broke down during his administration. So as a country, in some ways we have changed radically, and in other ways we're still there.
We really haven't. Yeah,
that's right.
That is very
Well, thank you.
Roosevelt, thank you for being with us tonight. I always enjoy
And
hearing from
one
you.
last comment.
Sure.
Everyone should do a tour of the Federal Reserve Bank.
Have you ever done that?
I have, many years ago.
Yeah. Interesting, I guess.
It's very
Absolutely incredible, and it gave me an appreciation and a better understanding of money as terms of people bringing their attention to pay more attention to money. Thank you.
Roosevelt, thank you very much. What was one of your biggest takeaways from the tour? Do you remember how you see it?
Just watching these enormous sheets of money being printed.
That would leave an
thinking,
impression.
Oh yeah, well, you know, I was fairly young at that point,
Yeah.
but just seeing these stacks of money, almost like when you go to a newspaper and you see the newspapers being printed, just stunned.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I do wonder why, because we love compromise in this day and age, why they didn't keep Andrew Jackson on some bills, but also decide to print another one with Harriet Tubman, another 20.
Well, if I were king or something, that's probably the option I would choose. You know, the European currency, and England in particular, but other European countries print multiple versions of the same denomination, and they update them far more frequently than we have. And that was the original proposal for the $5 bill. Initially Hamilton was going to be completely removed, and then Plan 2.0 came out that Hamilton would be on some, and other individuals would be on other versions of the same $5 bill. And maybe a slightly better compromise would have been Jackson and Tubman and others on the front of the 20, but the fact that he's still staying on the 20, and the interesting thing is too that he's on the back of the 20 with the White House and the big porch that we always see in the White House with the limos. Jackson, that was built while Jackson was president.
Oh, wow. Well, that is very fitting.
The White House was finally finished while he was president.
All right, interesting indeed. We are going to take another quick break. Before we do, I want to tell Polly, who called in, she was asking about the women's suffrage movement. That will be commemorated on the new $10 bill, so you can look for that. All right, we're coming right back with more of your comments, calls, questions. We're going to learn a little bit more about Andrew Jackson, so stick around.